Hey everyone, this is Arabella back for another episode of In My Musical Opinion, and as promised, we're joined again by Quinn. Last week, Quinn joined us in talking a lot about being a student at a music school, being in a band, the curriculum that entails, balancing all of that. And in the week or two since we did our last recording, Quinn has graduated. So please join me in congratulating Quinn on all he accomplished at Berklee, at the studio, and all he will accomplish going forward.
Thank you very much.
So we're here to talk about all things metal today, but I do want to tie it back to last week's conversation on curriculum. And that is, Quinn, if you were to design your own metal curriculum, which you somewhat have here, what would that entail?
Yeah, so the tricky part about, teaching students in this particular style of vocals is kind of getting over that first hurdle of figuring out which muscles that you need to be using. Because it's something that doesn't really come super naturally if you haven't engaged with it before. This is very different from normal singing, like just the body parts that you're using and the techniques that you need to, kind of become fluent at. And I have experience teaching, people that are just learning about metal for the first time, as well as people that have been kind of in this world for, most of their lives. And it can be really difficult, kind of like wiggling your ears. It's something that either you have the understanding of how to manipulate your body in this way, or you don't. And that's kind of something that's really difficult to teach because I don't know what it feels like for them. I don't know exactly how they're thinking about the way that their own vocal system works. So I found that it's much easier to get a lot more out of a lesson when maybe a student has already tried making these kinds of sounds and has found a little bit of success, and then they want to fine tune that, like, I can make the sound, but it sounds terrible. How do I make it sound a lot better versus how do I make this sound at all? There's definitely some sounds that people make in their everyday life that can be used as kind of an approximation of what we're going for. Like for the distortion that you would be using for metal singing, sometimes I'll have students clear their throat, like a because that's using the right muscles. But thing is, not everybody clears their throat like that. Some people do it in a way where if they try to sing like that, they're going to hurt themselves or it's just going to sound wrong. So I've definitely had a lot better luck teaching students that have already kind of done the trial and error on their own of figuring out how to isolate these muscles, rather than starting completely from scratch. And that's kind of the way that I learned how to do it. I would just start, my friend would show me this band. I've never heard anything like this before. So I'm going to try and imitate it. And it goes terribly for a while until eventually I try like one weird, minute thing, and it's, oh, there it is. I can kind of hear myself replicating that sound. And then I started to go into a lot more depth, like watching instructional videos, talking to my friends about this sort of thing. And that's kind of where the polishing of it came in. But getting started, it kind of just requires that you try to sound like your favorite singers, and you have to find it by yourself.
It can be frustrating, but isn't it funny? I always have a conversation on our sales calls, right? And people say, well, how long does it take to learn to sing? And I was like, well, how much imitating have you done so far? Like, do you sing along to the radio? Do you have a favorite singer, favorite band? And sometimes the response I get is, well, I don't want to sound like them. I want to find my own voice. And I always counter with, well, that's how we learn to find our own voice, is we take little bits from things we hear and we imitate it and we decide what we like and what we don't like. But it's funny to me that there's almost like an opposition to it, whereas that's how we learn to speak and sing.
Yeah. Like if you wanted to become the greatest tennis player the world has ever seen, well, first you're going to have to learn how to play tennis like everybody else
Right.
before you start making it your own. So I completely agree with that.
Let me take a step back for our listeners because metal, when we say metal or extreme singing, that's like saying I'm a classical singer, right? What does that mean? What genre specifically in that style do you sing? What like decade or era are you singing or enjoying? And I think metal is really the same way. To say someone sings metal, that's just like a whole umbrella term. So can you
Very
tell
true.
our listeners about like the kind of extreme singing metal distortion that you enjoy and that you specialize in?
Yeah. So there's absolutely kind of, a slider on the scale of vocal extremity, I guess. There's bands from the 80s like Metallica where you can hear a lot of grit in the singer's voice, but it's still being sung. There's a melody behind it. Um, Even all the way up until now with a lot of like emo pop punk songs, it has a fully sung melody, but certain words are emphasized with a scream in order to like bring more emotion forward. For the style that I work in mostly, there's very little melodic or clean singing. It is just all the harshness and, percussive sound of there's the term pure distortion, which doesn't technically exist because sound is still passing through your vocal cords and there's going to be a note behind any scream that you're doing. But there are tricks to kind of bury that note under layers of harmonics and just really gross grit that makes it sound like there's no note being sung at all. And it's just kind of a wall of harsh noise coming from the vocalist. That's when it comes to performance in heavy music, that's definitely what I have the most experience with. But I try to explore all of the other, places on that slider all the way back to like completely clean singing. And I think it's all really interesting because the technique used by someone who's screaming as part of a more melodic song is completely different from the technique for screaming that, say, Mitch Lucker from the band Suicide Silence it's doing. It's a completely different technique and it sounds completely different, has a completely different, received emotional impact as well.
Right. When I think of distortion, I think from a very technical or nerdy way of just thinking any distortion is going to be an aperiodic sound, meaning like
Hmm.
you were saying, there's a sound behind it, and it might not be like a symmetrical wave like you would
Hmm.
see in melodic singing. And my understanding from that actually came from guitar and distortion pedals. And I'm
Yeah.
curious if that's where, if you have any overlap between your guitar knowledge and your distortion for singing, or if it's completely different.
So the way most people think about it in a guitar signal chain is the guitar produces a vibration that's picked up by the guitar's pickups and sent as an electrical signal through a cable into wherever it's going. And that's an electrical waveform. And a distortion pedal will basically cut the tops off of those waveforms and give it like hard corners and edges where it would normally be a smooth wave. And that's what gets that kind of growly sound because it's literally cutting up the signal. For vocal distortion, it's just the manipulation of air. So it is kind of the interruption of a clean flow of whatever, be an electrical signal from a guitar or a stream of air coming from your lungs. But, one of them is electrical and one of them is much more mechanical. Like you're actually vibrating parts of yourself to make this sound happen rather than just manipulating a clean sound after the fact.
Yeah, my understanding was that, as you were saying, the airflow goes through the true vocal folds, and then you have different anatomy on top of that that's sort of doing what you were talking about with the electrical signal, right?
I can
So
see that. I
your
can see that.
false folds, for instance, might disrupt the, the air to the
Yeah.
vocal folds and then up through that filter, up through your face, mouth, and into the singing. But it's interesting because with the anatomy, it's a uh, different texture, right, than
Mhm.
um, with the guitar pedals. But what's interesting to me is even with the guitar pedals, you can have different types of distortion.
True.
I don't know. I like those analogies.
I can see the similarities for sure.
Yeah, but it's interesting though because I think part of the reason that you're such a great team member is you think about these things more from a performance perspective, whereas I'm sitting here sort of nerding out about it, but I think if I did that to a student, they'd be like, I just want to sing, and you come from a place of try it, do it. And I think that balance is really important.
I would agree with that. And that is definitely more of my teaching style. If a student comes in, they're like, hey, I want to learn how to sing this song. My first reaction is to play the song and just be like, hey, sing along. Like, what do you have already? And then we go from there.
Right. This episode is sponsored by ABS. Together, we are redefining what it means to be a musical community. Rather than a single central studio, our presence is woven into the fabric of our city. You'll find us in boutique practice rooms strategically placed at the heart of the action from Rock City, Alston to across from the Symphony in Back Bay. We gather in local pubs, breweries, at local open mics, channeling our resources into getting singers out of the practice room and onto stages in the greater Boston area. I love that part, though, of being on a team, whereas we kind of team up on it, whereas like you offer the one perspective, I offer another, and then the student, the great part is they come on with this third perspective, and I'm sometimes I'm like, oh, I never thought of it that way, but I'm definitely going to teach it that way now.
Yeah.
So with that individuality, you were also a avid songwriter. Do you think that the way that you write songs has changed because of the type of singing that you're doing?
Very much so. I do still occasionally write, like clean acoustic, kind of folky, poppy songs. But the way that I go about writing those songs is completely different from the way that I go about writing songs for my metal band. For my band, I'll normally start with either a cool guitar part that I came up with and decided to record, or a drum pattern that I hear in my head and I'd be like, oh, that's groovy. Let me get that down. Think of another thing that could go along with it. Listen to that a couple times and be like, where does this sound like it's going? And then I write the next section, the next section, the next section, so on until I've hit about 2 minutes, 30 seconds. And I'm like, well, that's enough. That's one song done. And then I'll write the vocal parts last. I'm going to think what performance from me, I think about it in a live performance scenario. I'll think what from me would support this music that I've already written the best? What would bring out the highlights of it? What maybe could cover some awkward guitar parts that I wrote? I'm just gonna okay, I'm gonna write a super loud vocal part right here because I just want a wall of sound effects supporting this drum part. But for clean stuff, I'll normally start with lyrics and a sung melody. I'll just be walking around my neighborhood kind of humming to myself and I'll find, oh, well, that's nice. And I'll try and keep that in my head. I might write it in my notes app. And then I'll come home, pick up a guitar, and then try and find chords that support the melody that I've just written. So whether it's distortion or clean, kind of flips the way that I write my songs.
Is that because with distortion, it's almost like we talk about subharmonics with distortion, right? The harmony underneath. Do you feel like it's almost like another harmony that's being added to your song with that extra melody part, or how do you feel about it?
When it comes to the technique for doing that, I have pretty much just one foundational note that I'll use for all of my screams. It sits right about here, kind of just in the middle of my comfortable speaking range, because when I'm doing what I'm doing right, you won't really hear that I'm singing a note at all. It just kind of sounds like two cinder blocks rubbing together. So I try to keep my foundational note as something that I don't really have to think about. It's just something that's comfortable for me. I'm not gonna, tire myself out doing that specific note for a half hour, 40-minute set. And it's just one more thing I don't really have to think about. So I don't really think of it as an extra harmony or anything because it's probably not even in the same key as the guitars. It's just what I'm starting off to build this harsher sound. And when it comes to the idea of writing a melody with heavily distorted vocals, that can kind of come down to the type of scream that you're doing. Um, like there are super, super low guttural, like earth shaking sounds you can do. There are like really high, piercing, like banshee-esque type of vocals. And it kind of when it comes to the melody writing of the vocals in a metal song, you're kind of switching between those different styles of scream to create that same ebb and flow of energy that you would with a top line made up of pitches, which this really isn't. It's like if I were to do a super high scream, you can tell that it's up there, but there's no really you can't really discern any notes from it. So yeah, it's not really pitched, but it does still have that same like this is a higher energy section, this is a lower energy section based on the type of vocals that I'm doing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think your point about preserving your voice or watching out for fatigue with something like this is a really fair point because what I would put out there is sometimes people think that distortion is, quote, bad for your voice, and it's not inherently so, but it is an athletic form of singing, just like classical singing is an athletic form of singing. So classical singers are really aware of vocal hygiene and how they take care of their voice. And similarly, so are metal singers.
To add on to that comparison, like an opera singer, they've trained their vocal cords to be able to stretch to ridiculous degrees that I would not be able to attempt. Like either I would end up, my voice cracking or becoming just a whisper, or I'd hurt myself by trying to do the same things that they're doing. It's the same for metal stuff. Instead of my like actual vocal cords that I've trained the false cords in a different place in my throat. And now they can handle a lot of pressure for an extended period of time when maybe if I'm trying to sing cleanly at that volume level with that intensity for that same amount of time, I don't know if I would be able to with as much consistency. It's kind of, I've spec'd my, experience more towards that style. So I'm going to be, more consistent in that style than I would a classical singer.
Yeah. But I would say that there has been a historical mutual respect between opera singers and hard rock metal singers because of
Agreed.
that understanding. And I think that's what brought me to enjoy it is I am a contemporary singer now, but I grew up singing the classical, in a classical style or a choral style. And just the athleticism, the technique, I think it goes hand in hand. So that
Very
sort of drew me to that. So, Quinn, you actually are in a full band of metal singers. How did you find these like-minded people? Because when I was looking for distortion teachers, it's actually very hard to find someone who not only can do it, but can teach it and kind of know what's going on as they do it versus I've just experimented till I got it, which I think has been part of your story, but you have now worked to be able to explain it and sort of pass it on to others.
Yeah. So the formation of my band was kind of interesting. We, I think, got together in either 2021 or 2022. I had just gotten to music school and I had been writing a bunch of heavy songs because I had been interested in that style since middle school. And I just been writing and recording all these songs in my dorm room. And I was thinking, wow, I really want to, perform these live. I want to be able to do this with someone. So it's not just me listening to my own song over and over and then, leaving it in a folder on my desktop forever. So in those dorms, you meet a lot of people your first few semesters at college. So I had kind of figured out who around me is into this world of heavy music. And out of all of those people, I was like, okay, well, I know this guy plays bass. I know this guy plays guitar and he's really good. And he's mentioned these bands that I know that I'm a fan of. Oh, and his best friend is like a really good drummer. Yeah, I'm just going to ask them all to join my project. Um, and then we did still need one more guitar because I write a lot of like dual guitar parts that harmonize, but I only had one guitarist. So I was thinking about, okay, in my classes, I remember seeing this one kid in the back who had painted his nails black and he was always wearing like Slipknot and Chelsea Grin shirts. He might play guitar. I'll ask him because he seems to, be in this community. So I DM'd him and he did play guitar and he's been our fifth member ever since. I didn't know him until I asked him to be in the band just because of the shirt he was wearing. But you can kind of, just through conversation and noticing like who people are hanging out with, you can kind of spot the people that are also in that world for sure. I'm in the band, I'm kind of the only person that actually does these kinds of vocals. The rest of them are purely instrumentalists, but there's still a community of heavy vocalists at Berklee. Most of them, all know each other. There's some rivalries, obviously, when it's like, oh, my band got this gig. Ah, I wanted that gig, and my screams are better than yours. But it's,
That's funny.
yeah, the community definitely exists. You just kind of have to, like, talk to people, listen for when they're talking about the bands they like, see if there's any stylistic overlap, and then work with them.
Right. This episode is sponsored by Piano for the Vocalist. Piano for the Vocalist is your ultimate resource for unlocking the skills to self-accompany with confidence. This largely free program is focused on teaching singers to use collaborative piano techniques for vocal performance rather than traditional piano skills, empowering you to accompany yourself with ease. And this kind of speaks to what we were talking about last week when we were kind of saying we're not trying to discourage going to music school, in that there's a lot of benefits to that. And here's one of them, right? The network of even just metal singing. Like, you're not really going to find that as easily outside of a community like that. So if that's something you're interested in, even though, to my knowledge, a school like Berklee doesn't offer a vocal distortion degree or a metal singing degree, you find a lot of like-minded people there.
Very true. I think almost all of the metal vocalists at Berklee are kind of in the same situation that I was. I got into Berklee as a guitar student. Um, getting in had nothing to do with my singing or really what I do in performance, which is just sing. I very rarely actually play guitar on stage. It's just what got me through the door. And most of the vocalists I know also played guitar to get in. Some of them are drummers too, but yeah, it never was the thing we went to Berklee to do. It's just something that we found fun. And then once we got here, we were like, oh, there's people that need a vocalist, or I want to, decide to take this more seriously. And then the community's there. But I don't really know if anybody went to Berklee specifically for this,
Right. It's funny, and I'll speak sort of in a nebulous way for confidentiality and to protect everyone involved, but I worked at a voice clinic, and so I came in with the specialty of voice, but I got a lot of opportunities through my piano playing, because a lot of vocalists don't have a lot of vocalists do play piano. I think it's false to say otherwise, but many don't have the accompaniment skills that I had worked on. And so I got a lot of opportunities, not just through the vocals, but through piano. And I always think that's funny because it was the thing that I was a little bit more insecure about. But you never know what the thing is that's going to get you through the door and the thing that's going to put you sort of ahead of the game.
I'd say it's good to kind of cultivate as many skills as you possibly can.
Right.
For as long as you can, as intensely as you can, because you never know which one of them is actually gonna, hit for you and really take you somewhere that you want to be. So
Definitely.
yeah.
So I would end with this. Quinn has a lot of tutorials online that he's put out and a lot of covers that he's put out. So I would check those out for sure. And I would also encourage our listeners to reach out if you are interested in working with Quinn on singing, on songwriting, or metal, or all of them put together. We're always happy to make introductions and just introduce Quinn to like-minded people and the like-minded people to Quinn. So don't hesitate there. But I always like to end our recordings with, if there was one practical thing that you would tell everybody, what would that be?
Yes. If you're already interested in metal vocals and you have some experience, singing along to some of your favorite records in the car, even before doing that, warm up. It's not only is it going to make you, have a lot more longevity for your voice, you aren't going to, you're going to find a little bit of discomfort, maybe if you're just starting out, but warming up helps, if not delay, then eliminate that discomfort. One of my personal favorites, I do this anytime I'm about to track some screams or go on stage with my band. I just hum. Explore the range like, and rumble around. Just super gentle, super easy, super nice to your voice, but it gets everything moving. It gets you used to the sound that you're trying to make before you start dumping air through your vocal system, which you would be on stage. So yeah, just make sure you're prepared before you go full force with it. Make sure you're comfortable using the muscles before you start really full sending it at not 100%, but you know what I mean. Make sure that you're in the right place.
I think that's great advice. And I would say too, as a continuing thought to that, whenever you try something new, right? When you go to the gym and you work a new muscle group, you might feel it, and that's okay, but we never want it to be painful. So if that's something you're experiencing, take a step back, either look at your own technique or reach out to us so that we can kind of help with that warm-up process. And, that's not meant to be a plug for us, but that's to put a little star by that for any kind of singing. There is a difference between a good workout and this isn't feeling good. And we always want singing to feel good. So that is the goal, right? To communicate and feel good doing it. So I will end with this. Quinn, thank you so much for doing an extended podcast with us. We have such great material. And as you can see, Quinn has a lot of expertise in a lot of different things. And we're really grateful for you to come on and just give a little bit of that to us.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun.